Good afternoon, it's Joyful Hermit again, and I just decided I'm going to talk this out, this narcissistic sociopath stuff. I don't want to carry it over, I want to get it out. And I'm sure some of it will come later in little bits and pieces of other aspects of life because it carries with you in your life. Um, but I'm hoping that the flashbacks will stop as a result of me getting this out. I really hope that it helps somebody else, even one person, to avoid it, to start recognizing if you're with someone who's like this, that you get out before it gets more complicated. And it seems crazy that someone such as me would block things that would happen, but the subconscious takes over. And when things get too painful or too much to cope with, it goes into a subconscious block. And that's what happens with people who are abused. And except with me, I blocked it to get through, but I have these flashbacks all these 39 years later that I really don't want, and I've prayed for them to go away. So I'm hoping, God, that this is a means, and by learning to love as God loves, that will also heal me. So, um, anyway, there were different time periods that he started giving these ultimatums. If you don't do this, I will divorce you. And another time was when I was just early on pregnant with our little boy. I had sensed this soul wanted to be born. And this is a positive if you are in such a marriage or have been, like I have been, to not feel as if it was a big mistake or a horrible thing. Well, it was horrible, but there were 3 children who were born who wanted to be born. Their souls were given. God wanted them to be born to me and my husband. I have wondered that had I married someone else, those souls would have been maybe born with a different husband. I don't know. It's a thought that I've had. I, I, I think that no matter what, God foreknew and forechose to have 4 souls, and one passed and is waiting for me in heaven. I've been blessed with seeing him and being able to hold him briefly in a vision. And I didn't understand at first until I recognized it looked like my little boy, but it wasn't. I knew then it was Samuel John, the baby that was miscarried. And he was a toddler at the time, maybe 18 months old, when a woman in white dressed as a nurse came out and gave him to me to hold. Briefly, she stayed there with me and said, I must take him back now. And I was filled with a peace and a joy and a knowing that that was the baby and that he is waiting for me. And I often ask him to, look out for your brother and your sisters here. Pray for your brother and sisters. Pray for your mother. Things like that, because he's there in heaven waiting and enjoying eternal life and a wonderful life he has. And I don't understand why he wasn't allowed to live in 1981, but he wasn't. And it may have been God's attempt to shake my husband, and he was shaken with that miscarriage. It scared him. Plus, the uh, woman that he was with at the time, her husband had found out. So they were off, at least for a while, a short while, I think it was. But it scared him enough that he told me he was going to change his life. He didn't admit to anything, but he already knew that I knew because I kept mentioning things about it. And he would deny, but anyway, he knew that I was at minimum, highly suspicious. But these people, they live, they are intelligent. Think of handling all those lies, all those double lives, triple lives, multiple lives. And then they become very mean when you get onto them. So it's best not to confront unless you need some kind of proof that they're going to flare. Because when I confronted him in the marriage, after he up and just ended our plans to have our store there, that would have been very successful. But I think he realized he wouldn't be able to easily get away with his multiple sex lives and other women, with my sister and brother-in-law living right there, and he would be more seen through by others also in that kind of a setting, and it was a far more religious area than where we were. Even though he would go to church and fake that he was into it. So, but he started doing ultimatums, and for me, there was a big shift in the marriage when I confronted him after we were both home from Texas, and I said, "You are like your dad, and you are a cad. Nothing but a cad," I said. And wow, he was whoa with that, and big anger, and things changed between us. And he knew that I saw him as he was. But I went back into a very workable mode. Got us moved into another house, and then when he got this other job without even telling me, there was that control thing. I've got this other job. You have to come with me. You're my wife. If you don't, I'm taking our daughters with me. And I didn't want any kind of a big war or to risk losing my daughters, obviously. I got into the mode, and I was always good at that, of making the best of horrible situations. And I was always a peacemaker growing up, doing what I was supposed to do in order to keep things calm. So I did what I needed to do, but things had changed. And then immediately when I recognized this woman, first time I met her, we hadn't even moved down there yet. The children and I hadn't yet. He had gone ahead and moved down. I knew trouble. I could sense how they interacted with each other. So this kind of stuff kept going on, and the increasing thing of his using, "I'll divorce you if you do this, or if you do that, or if you don't do this or that." And so I knew I needed to get into some other level of career that was more suitable to me than classroom teaching. And so I had wanted to go to law school. Innately, somehow, I wanted to go to law school. I think subconsciously, I knew I was being mistreated, and consciously I knew that too, put down, that I wasn't regarded as worth anything by him. And law school was something I had thought about in high school, even of being a lawyer. And I think God put it in my mind too. It would have been very convenient, as it turned out, had I. And even now I could practice law from bed. I could, certain types of law, like estate law or something. But I got enrolled. I got accepted to a weekend and a couple of nights a week classes of law school, a 3-year program it was. It would be about an hour drive, and it was in a town where we had used to live. And he had fits. No, when we married, we were always going to be in education together. That was the deal. If you go to law school, I'm divorcing you, and I'll get the kids. And whether he would or not, I already knew how treacherous he could be in his temper and his control. And I had that level of fear. So I said, okay, how about I'll get an administration degree? And I found this doctorate program. It was a master doctoral. Well, I already had a master's degree, but I had to take a few courses that would morph in with a doctorate in education administration with USC. And it had weekend classes, about maybe a little less than an hour away. Most weekends, about 4 semesters of that, and then I'd have to drive to campus for the other. And I was willing to do that because I needed to do something. They put you down, they belittle anything that I would do, like in the assistant projects director position. He would claim he got me that job, or he actually was the one with the ideas. He could never let me have anything. He was the great parent. He was everything. And I'm secure enough. I didn't care. Go ahead. But I knew that he had an insecurity inside of him, including his need to womanize. But I did not know he had this very bad personality disorder and all of the tendrils of it that make it really rather dangerous. You can end up being killed by a sociopath. And not often, but they get tinges of psychopathy too. So I started the doctoral program. Well, he decided it was maybe after a year or so that he got into a doctoral program. Lasted, he didn't even finish one course, I think, and um, dropped out. He wasn't a student, but he didn't need to be. He could lie in his interviews and be very impressive, and he did do hard work, and he was a gifted administrator. Um, However he did it was up to him, I guess. But he did, and he was innovative with programs and got things done. And he messed with his teachers or school board members or whoever he wanted to, and then we'd up and have to move when he would get himself into more hot water. So that's how I ended up being at least able to get a doctorate in education administration. And then when um, we were there for maybe 4 months when the accident happened. He'd gone on ahead to Beverly Hills and had pretty much not been coming back. Maybe once every 2 to 3 weeks he would come back rather than every weekend he had promised, and he was going to come Wednesday nights also, but that quickly stopped. And during that time period that I was still back with the kids and he was in Beverly Hills, he came home with his laundry when he would come, and there was some women's underwear, and they weren't mine. You wouldn't believe the story he created for that. I think I mentioned that in another video. He even sincerely and convincingly, well, you can ask my secretary Clovis. She'll back me up. I didn't bother. If he had talked to her, of course she'd back him up. She needed her job, he would threaten her or something. But I knew he was having an affair, but I had learned to live with it. It's not a good way to live, but it's one way to live. And I kept thinking, if we get up there, then, maybe things will improve. Well, it ended up they didn't. Car accident. 3 weeks later, came home at 6 or something, and I had dinner about ready. and just announced he didn't want to be married to me anymore, and he was going to start a new era of honesty, which a sociopath cannot do. They can't be honest. They have let evil get into them to such an extent that they live this total other life. And he liked being in church. He could look good and important. When we did have the baby boy and had him baptized, he went up and down the aisle, holding the baby up in the air like he was holding the Messiah. My son, reaching over for people to see him. And even the minister laughed. He was an older man, and I was embarrassed. But by then I knew, this is him. And I had decided I want to keep the marriage and hope in time that he would change. We had a working relationship that I subconsciously allowed this other stuff. But then, as I had said before, I had decided when he admitted finally his affairs, and that did get to me though, because I realized then that there had been many more than the 3 or so that I had suspected. And it did hit me, the rejection. I had been rejected in other ways, such as all the things he would say to demean me. But I had gotten used to that because I knew it wasn't true. I knew I wrote the article. I knew I was the one that did the studies and got the good grades. I knew I was a good mother. I was there for the children, in other words. He wasn't. And never would I split up children but when he had told me that other time that I mentioned in the last video, I'll take this daughter and you take that one, and we'll just divorce. And that was a horrible thing. And I remembered after the first baby was born, seeing that Parent Trap movie and weeping quietly. He wasn't there watching with me. My mother was. I didn't want my mother to ask anything. I had this foreboding, a forewarning of a divorce that would be. And when he said that about our daughters, it came back to me. Because in the Parent Trap, these 2 sisters, they were twins. Mine weren't twins, but they were very close, are very close in age, were separated. The parents chose to each take one. No way would I ever. And so I agreed to his condition. I learned to agree to his conditions. He didn't want to go house hunting, so I agreed to remain renting. And I realized that put him in a position of keeping the marriage fluid. He told me he just wanted to see how it would go there with that school district. But as it turned out, he was already not wanting to be married. He hadn't wanted to be for a long time. Probably not since Texas, when he knew that I saw he was a cad. A cad and nasty, like his dad. But he was much worse than his dad, with all of his other psychological issues, personality disorders. So his dad was not a narcissist, and didn't cheat that I know of. I no, he wouldn't have. And it's just, so anyway, got through that, but there were several other times that he would try to control, because I wanted to still keep the marriage for the sake of the children, and insisted we go to counseling. He loved counseling. That was a place he could get attention. And he loved it that we had these students behind a one-way glass, interns, they asked us if we minded, if they would watch as part of their getting their psychology degrees. And they would sometimes ask questions through the, send a message in or make comments or things. And one time when um, he had kept ranting about me and how horrible I was in all these different ways. And by then I just sort of sat with my head down. I was so intimidated by him and fearful of him by then because I knew his rage and I knew how cruel he had become over the years to me. No empathy whatsoever. And the therapist noticed that and said something to me and asked me, well, how do you feel toward him? And I timidly said, he's a bully. He's a bully. And the husband just raised up in a rage, and his face would get red and bulge out more. And he was very tense person, very tense, and got more tense as time went on with him. When I married him, he wasn't nearly as tense. But you can imagine living with his soul in you and all of that evil and confusion of his life and the hypocrisy of his very soul and life. So, and trying to keep it in order and straight and play the game of fooling me, and then detesting his wife. He detested my goodness, as it turned out. So, that I was a good, at least a sincere person, very sincere and striving to be good, and genuinely liked church and God and loved my children. I loved being a mother and would have done that full time until they were well into elementary had I not had all these threats, these ultimatums. So they got him calmed down, but that was really the beginning of the end because I had said that. He was all the more on me. And I was injured and had a lot of pain, but I tried everything I could to be more pleasing to him to keep the marriage going. And but until he overshook the daughter and did that chest thumping on her, that drew a big line with me then. However, I knew I had to let it play out. You should not, well, I guess you do need to if you must. But in my case, even the therapist called me. I canceled more therapy. He wasn't going to go back then. And it was expensive, and I was going to have to start paying, and I didn't have the money. So I had much less salary at the time. Well, wasn't even working the first semester, but I got a job the second semester. He threatened me. If you don't take that job, this semester job, then you can't take the 3 courses that I was planning to take instead of 2 to get this specialized doctorate. So, and it ended up it didn't matter, but it was the idea, and I didn't like knowing that I had to play this game longer until he left for good, and we had the divorce going. So, and that was really a prudent thing. And the psychologist even wanted to keep going with us. She said, this isn't going to be easy with him. You may need our help in getting you through the details of the divorce. But looking back, it would have been a nightmare even with the therapist because he already was done with her because she agreed that he was a bully. And that's what really made him enraged and was done with her. Once you see through these people, or someone else does, you're in trouble. You're done as far as being able to work things out amicably. I still thought we could after he left. I gave him half of things, half the pans even that were wedding present from my parents, half furniture, gave him whatever, just to keep things even. And I had taken out, there was 10,000 cash in a savings account. The rest of our investments were in land, and that we had invested in, which was smart doing. I had wanted to do that, and a realtor where we had lived before, and he by then knew what a good investment. But we had 10,000 cash, so I took 5 out and put it in a separate account because I knew I was going to need money. He wasn't going to share with me. I knew that in advance. So I had to protect myself in that way. And I didn't know to go ahead and get my own credit cards or anything like that. And in that time period, it was 84. It was, and then turned into 85. It was very difficult. So to get away from these people is not easy, but you must do it. And let them feel that they have the control. I made another critical error. Well, there were other things, even with sex, with marital sex, and videos and drugs, that he kept trying to coerce me to do things that I would never do, and I refused. And it didn't go well, but I wasn't going to anymore. Already he was leaving, he had left, so I wasn't going to do anything at all that went against God and moral principles and ethics. I was done. And God gave me the strength. And he was very vicious in what he would do and threatening. But by that time, I knew that the end was near and that God was going to see me through. And I did see this right in here. This comes from Maccabees. It was when Maccabeus was getting ready to fight, and his men said, "How can we possibly win over all these troops coming at us? We're just few." And he told his troops, the small group of fighters, "They come against us with great insolence and lawlessness. Do not fear them, for victory in war does not depend on the size of the army, but on the strength that comes from heaven. We are fighting for our lives and our laws. The Lord will crush our enemies before our eyes." So turn to God when it gets right down to the end, where the person leaves, or you need to leave and get out of there if it becomes dangerous for you. And I knew he'd become very angered. He had gone away for another weekend, and then was going to come back, and had some tickets from one of his Beverly Hills parents, tickets to a concert, a symphony or something. He didn't want to take me by then. This was the last weekend. It was right before St. Patrick's Day. But I said, well, he wanted to take the oldest daughter with him. So he was supposed to come back and take her. And it got later and later on Saturday evening. I had gone to lunch. A girlfriend had come up from another area that we had lived, and we had lunch together. And she didn't come for any ulterior purposes other than to have lunch with me. We hadn't seen each other in about a year and a half. And somehow he decided he was so insecure, even in his bullying, and that's why they bully, that he somehow thought that this woman who had gone through a divorce herself was getting me all psyched up for a divorce. Well, he wanted a divorce. My husband already wanted the divorce. He'd already decided he didn't want to be married anymore. But no, this other friend and I, we were just talking. We weren't planning anything. She wasn't coaching me or anything like that. So, but he got home, and the kinds of delusions that sociopaths get in their mind, they become paranoid um, when a big shift is coming in their own lives, and it gets scary. And but he didn't come home. He didn't want to then take his daughter. It's just crazy how they're just sick. I shouldn't laugh. It's more than it's evil, but it just defies how you can even grasp it all. So the oldest daughter was all curled up on the sofa the next morning, saying she was sick, had a tummy ache, and wasn't well enough to go to church. And I took the baby and the other daughter and myself. The husband said he didn't want to go. He was barely speaking. Had done all this accusing of me with my friend I hadn't seen in a year and a half. She used to be a neighbor, and we'd gone to lunch. While he'd been gone for the weekend, from Friday through Saturday into late Saturday evening. But they always accuse and put everything on to the person that they are trying to control and tear down to nothing. But I was getting my sea legs by then. I made another, he also, so he left. When I got home from church, he had a suitcase packed, and I talked about it in another video, and he left, gave him half everything, and worked out with him, because I thought everything was going to go smoothly. Big mistake. Don't assume anything with a narcissistic sociopath. They have to be in control, and they want everything. Even if they don't need it and don't really want it, they want to take it. Because he told me outright he was going to destroy me, even if it took all his life to do it. So he wanted to wait, he said, before anyone knew that we were getting a divorce, until the end of his school year. He knew he wasn't going to be rehired. He'd gotten into trouble again, just less than 2 years. Too many women. And my principal knew that it was going to be a divorce. I needed to get a job. So I explained to my principal I'd gotten this wonderful review, and I asked him if there was any chance I could get a job there for the next year. And he wanted to hire me, but there was no opening, and he wouldn't know until late summer. And he wanted to know why, because he knew he was in with the district office, Dr. Levine, and with those people. And he knew that my husband was out, being let go. The dance of the lemons, they call it. And they always offer a wonderful recommendations, which is a horrible thing to realize what they do in education. They write recommendations that are glowing for people they want to get rid of. They don't say he's humping all the women in the district office and the elementary school, or involved with parents or whoever, or he's immoral and he's been terrible to his wife and 3 little children, including a baby. They don't. They want to move the person on without any troubles. So he quickly was able to get a job as a principal, I think in Fountain Valley or something, so a school district. And but he told me he wanted to be the one to to decide when anything could be said. But I took my wedding ring off one day, maybe it was in April or something, and only one teacher saw. But he noticed when he came to get the kids for a Wednesday evening or something that my wedding ring was off, and that enraged him. He hadn't given permission for that yet, but he didn't know that the principal knew. But I did realize what I was dealing with, and he said he would give some child support. So he would pay the rent. He would leave some money once a month, not a lot, but he left some money for the three kids. And I did have that teaching job that semester, but I had nothing lined up. So I knew that I needed to get things lined up. And this lawyer I had went to our church, a Methodist church there in Pacific Palisades. And he said it will take time, but at that point in time, we thought everything was going to be very agreeable. Don't count on that with a narcissistic sociopath. It's not going to be, because they will fight for everything and they will try to get your lawyer bill up, do anything to cause you grief and harm. Even though they don't want you, you become their target to destroy, because you're the one that saw through them. And they don't ever forget that you ruined their game, even though they were going to end their game with you. So that you really have no win-win with a narcissist sociopath. You don't. So don't beat up on yourself for doing things a certain way or a certain not. So I realized I needed to get the divorce going, because I needed to have child support established by a court, even temporary child support, because I knew as things would go along, he wouldn't be giving me anything. And he flipped out when he found out that I had taken half of the 10,000, which everything in that state is 50-50. I took no more than what I would be given, but I knew I would need money for a first and a last of the house we rented and that kind of thing. So you have to make preparations, and you have to do what you've got to do to survive and to protect your children. So that blew him up. Then he finally got served with divorce papers, and he had himself a job. And the fact that he wasn't the one who filed first, or who that people found out from, or whatever it was that he thought, it can be anything, and they will go after you. So just so you know that, if you're in that situation now, and I had a daughter that went through a divorce recently, and she was with a narcissistic covert introvert. And the narcissism within him was a problem. And I advised her, do not fight over things. And she didn't. And there was the important things she did. She got half the retirement. I did not get that. My lawyers pointed out it had already been over 2 years with this monster narcissistic sociopath battling. And he wouldn't even involve his lawyer. He would just go to my lawyer directly. And I would have to then engage my lawyer to defend me. Fighting over any little thing that I still had, even though he was at first thought, yeah, this is okay, and he didn't even need the stuff. He was living with women who had apartments and houses filled with furniture. But then he finally did get his own apartment, because he hadn't had time yet in Fountain Valley to find an affair mate. He carried over one from Beverly Hills for a while, but it's just a nightmare with these narcissistic sociopaths or narcissists. And I thought, and when we got far away, there were things all through the five years that we were in this other town. It was always something that he was doing to make my life difficult, and he would use the children. He didn't care if he hurt them in order to get to me also. They demand control over even my dad, who wasn't familiar with any of the freeway system, and was, how old was he? 70 something. Um, I think early 70s or late 60s, and stressed out with me in the hospital bed in our little tiny house I finally was able to get. And he had to drive the kids up for their visitation 50% of the time and back. Then later I hired someone to do it, which cost me more. It was, but the man really took pity on me and gave me a good deal, a good price for doing the driving, because I couldn't sit to drive after my back surgery. But never apologized to me, and has since worked it out, gotten the son aligned with him. I didn't realize to what extent. So I wasn't invited to the wedding a month ago, not quite a month ago, and the son is cut off from me. He's believed the lies. I say he's drank the Kool-Aid, and it was very upsetting. But I think with the wedding past and finding out that I wouldn't have wanted to have been there for the type of wedding it was, and the type of element, and the bride's parents were very upset, I'm told, and I feel terrible for them. I've never met them. I haven't met her. My son has been cutting me out of his life for a long time. And I will say that I could have stopped things sooner, way, way sooner. But I didn't, and I was afraid to. At first, I was very naive and ignorant and didn't realize the depth of his illness and the breadth of the evil and the depth of the evil that's in this person. Because he was a teacher, the parents liked him. Some of the other teachers liked him, not all. And he turned on a teacher that he'd been sort of close to at first. And she wasn't anyone he was having an affair with. She was very much older and very, very heavy, and had a woman friend, but he had relied on her. She had helped him a lot when he was a new teacher. So they use people. They are users and takers, and they will destroy your life. And my situation with my adult children, I think, was that when God sent me back to rear my children, and I had all this suffering, my attachment to my children was very great. And even being a hermit, even my spiritual father, Father Fahey, would say, make sure that your children and grandchildren, that you're always available to them. He didn't really approve of um, Saint Seraphim, the Seraph, who, when his mother came to see him and pleaded at the door just to see him one more time, and then his brothers came and wanted to see him because they knew that they weren't going to see him again. One of them was going to die. And he kept refusing. And Father Fahey said, with his Irish accent, no. He said, no. He said that went too far to not have that kind of charity and compassion for his mother, to see her one more time, to let her see him before she died. And but Seraphim was so geared in wanting to keep his hermit life with this monastery, that he was very into the rule and the laws of that, to a point, and perhaps later in his life, or when Jesus had him in judgment, feel what his mother felt. He probably was very remorseful and thought, yes, I should have, because she wasn't going to take him at that point. She had begged him not to go to the monastery to begin with. She didn't want her son being a monk. And it's understandable, you lose your child off the bat. But for those of us, if we learn to love as God loves, we can take a lot more of heartbreak. And I already, growing up and married, I loved my husband at a different level than he loved me. And there were good times and there were fun times. But narcissists love themselves. They can't really love another person. Not in any kind of a healthy way. They love the person to use the person and to have the person make them look good and make them feel like, I'm okay. I have this lovely wife. And they also then, anyway, well, I lost my train of thought. But so I'm thinking with my children, I hung on to them about 10 years too long, where I wanted to have what I thought a normal parent-adult-child relationship of adult to adult. And maybe talk to each other once a week and get caught up on the grandchildren or different things like that. But they didn't want that. The one did, but it's been up and down. The other one didn't. I think I hurt her feelings terribly, unintentionally, by moving someplace else instead of with them. And I've apologized. I've asked for forgiveness for all my children for whatever I have done in life and as their mother. But we have to accept not everyone is where we are in being able to forgive. With loving spiritually, you come to forgiveness as part of love. And we have to be able to have a spiritual forgiveness. So I think I will still do my scripture things that have taught me more again about loving as God loves, of having spiritual or holy love in another video. But I think I have concluded what I want to say. I think I have said enough about, I have analyzed my part. And even my mother, when she came to help me pack up from the rental house to get moved to the small town and take care of the children, the last week I taught at Beverly Hills High. And my husband, we were separated then, very much separated. He'd been served with divorce papers. We were waiting for the temporary custody and child support order time in court, which everything was backlogged, took a long time. He came to the house to drop the kids off. No, I think he just came to get something that he wanted and demanded. And he got in my mom's face and scared her to pieces and yelled and carried on and threatened her. I don't think he thumped her sternum, but he got right. Oh, and when he left, she went back to the phone and called my dad long distance. You need to come out here. We need help. He's terrible. I've never seen him like that. And they had told me before that I was the last daughter they'd ever thought would ever get a divorce. Because when they would come to visit, he would show them a grand time. And he would treat me so nicely. And he was such a great dad and involved with the kids in front of other people. That's the narcissist. So anyway, she then said, I never reared you to take treatment like this. She was like, whoa. And she hadn't, but I didn't know. It's hard to believe that, that I was so in a state of confusion and naivete, and my subconscious and my conscience had so developed a means of staying married and living with a person like that. And those of you who are in this, who have left comments, to write, for me to say more, that people need to know about this. People who can be warned, hopefully. Read up on it online. I didn't have online to study what was his problems, but I sure have since. But you'll understand why I didn't act otherwise and why I acted as I did. It twists your whole life. You don't become yourself anymore, and you lose strength because they take you down. That is part of their MO. Their modus operandi is to reduce you to a puppet, a fearful mouse. And that's why I knew when he was beating and kicking his youngest stepson, and my daughter at the time, who was 15, the oldest, called me. They were out there visiting, enforced visitation, that they chose to go because it was more fun and safer. I had a sigh of relief. I thought it was going to be better when he had stepchildren all the time there, because the kids could at least have each other. And I thought my kids would be protected more. And my kids were. That woman, his wife's, or the one he was living with at the time and then married later, wasn't. Her kids weren't safe. And that little boy was beat and kicked. And when I asked my daughter when she called me, what do? We're locked up in the oldest boy's bedroom, and we don't know what, or bathroom, I guess. We don't know what to do. And I said, call the police and etc. And I said, where is the mother? Where's Chris? I can't say her name, but anyway. Where's the mother? She's standing outside the bedroom door, the master bedroom door, where the dad, my ex, was in there beating and kicking this little boy who was screaming bloody murder for help. And I thought, I understood. I thought, what on earth? But she was scared too. She stood out there like a mouse. And when they came one Sunday morning, when we were getting ready for church, this was after the kids had refused to go visit him, and we were still in a small town in California, waiting to go to court, to get out if we could. He scared us to death. And police came, though, and made him leave, threatened to arrest them both if they didn't, because they were starting to refuse. And he, of course, started to argue with the police authority figure. He wasn't going to take it. He was the great principal and the great father. But the police, or the deputy, interviewed my kids separately, me out of the room. The man who had come from church to protect us, who had been in the military, explained to the deputy, I'm a married man, I own a business, and which business? And deputy knew of it, so he wasn't connected to me other than as a good Samaritan coming to protect us until the deputy could arrive, because it took them a long time in an unincorporated area to get to their calls. So if they had something else they had to be doing. So, and then they threatened, I could hear them, they threatened to arrest them if they didn't leave. He had his wife with him, or girlfriend with him, and she just cowered right beside him, tiny cowered down, but beside the man she was living with and had her children with him. And then, of course, I had gotten into my strength because I was away from him, but I didn't really blame her. And the hateful letter she wrote to me, I never blamed her, because I knew he had tricked her and convinced her I was horrible, just as he had convinced me, his fiancée before me, who he said was just a girlfriend, and was the one after him, and he didn't really want her, whatever, so they're twisted, and get out from them. And I would say, get out knowing it's going to be a trouble, but get yourself someplace safe. And as I coached my daughter with a narcissistic introvert, not a sociopath, she had it much, much easier. But still, the narcissist made it difficult. because he wanted, things, and he was right and she was wrong, and he was going to punish her. Let him have, let him have all that stuff. And there were some things later I said, well, maybe, but I said, no, not worth his temper, because he had a temper. Narcissists tend to have a temper if they don't get their way, because they're great and they're insecure inside, though. So I learned at least to help her in that regard of the divorce portion. I did think at a point in time that a lawyer would have been better than a mediator, but then I realized no, and I said, you'll spend more money on a lawyer than it's worth, than the stuff that you would gain from it. Just make sure you get and the law will back you up, will get your half of the retirement, and half of what is in a house that you have. So if I had given my ex everything, he even fought over wanting the baby bed when he had an apartment, and had the child every other weekend, and sometimes would call and didn't want them. So, and didn't want a makeup date either, which was, thank God, I would praise God for that. And they didn't want to go, and the girls often wouldn't go. They would hide behind the sofa. And I was told, I don't have to drag them out. So these are just certain, if they're a certain age and you have a disability or something, I was told the court will back you up. With your bad back, you can't be literally pulling them and pushing them into his car. So, and making them go. The little one, unfortunately, had to. But hope these are some tips for you, but don't wait long like I did. But I waited long enough that I knew at that point that I pretty much had to let, and God opened the gates for me, had to let him sort of feel. You have to let those narcissists feel as if they have the control. Let them feel that. And when it comes to material objects, don't worry about them as far as items and objects. But the law will give you what you deserve as far as equity in property, half of savings if you're in a 50-50 state, which most states are now, and half of the person's retirement. And if you have worked, then your half is split. So good luck. I'm praying for you women out there, and some men. There are some women, narcissistic sociopaths. There are. It's mostly men with that disorder, though. So God bless his real presence in us. Sorry I went on so long. I hope and pray that this is part of my ultimate healing, because it's been with me far too long. But I do believe, as Coyne, Koine, a viewer, wrote and said to me, reminded me, that God does all things for good to those who love him. And there was some reason why I was married to him and he was married to me. And I have forgiven him. I have prayed to God and had a waking vision that I was like a flower girl for he and his wife to enter heaven someday. I don't want them going to hell. At this point, spiritually, I'm no judge, but they are not spiritual people. They are not religious people. They have not been good to me, not apologetic or anything. And he's reneged twice on my son, but my son somehow is under his spell. So even being reneged on in a couple of major ways involving some finances and stuff didn't ring a bell in my son's head. So I understand. Hey, I understand, because he did that to me. So see, and don't blame others don't blame the next woman that yours is with or whatever, because they're duped just as we were. So and ask God to forgive ourselves. And we have to forgive ourselves. I had to do it again last night when I was starting to get so depressed over what happened to my life as a result of this. My last 10 years of, and only years of adult life after undergrad was with a narcissistic sociopath who tried to destroy me and hurt me deeply and hurt my children worse than that. That's what the thing is. So even though they think, well, he's successful and they are intrigued by him and want a relationship with him, they're adults now. That's up to them. And if he doesn't hurt them, or if he does and they don't mind, that's up to them. But during the time our children are little, we do, at least I felt, a moral and ethical obligation to protect, as I did with my grandson when he was bad-mouthing the grandson and making a big deal about this situation that had happened when they visited, and saying he never wants him back and that kind of thing, and calling the other adult children to tell them, and not telling the boy's mother what happened that night. The grandson had a medical incident of some sort that was serious, sounded serious. So when I'm dead, it will be over. It will be over. I hope and pray. Anyway, I'm going to try to learn to love as God loves, and hope this has moved me on from it. God bless His real presence in us. Let us learn to love as God loves.